The second thing is that it bristles with receptors because it acts as because of where it sits at the base of the brain, it senses circulating hormones, nutritional cues, which is what we're talking about, but a whole bunch of other things, stress hormones, sex hormones, all these hormones as well. So it's bristling with receptors. It is also the part of the brain that secretes the most hormones, neurohormones, and neuropeptides.
Hmm.
So with all that in place, if you go to some other part of the brain, the only part of the brain that perhaps is sort of similar to it is probably the hindbrain,
Hmm.
but that also sits sort of as a sensor area. The rest of the brain is complex. Look, it is very complex, okay, particularly the higher order, but they're not as heterogeneous. They're not necessarily organized into nuclei in as such, certainly not as many as they are within the hypothalamus.
Hmm.
So
Hmm.
so that really is it. It's the most complex part of the brain,
Hmm.
undoubtedly.
Yeah. So to reiterate some of that, so A, it's an ancient part of the brain. So the
Yep.
hypothalamus exists basically in all animals, and it's going to have
Mhm.
similar characteristics across all of them. There's going to be differences as well, and we might talk about some of the human differences compared to rodents, say, but the basic features of the hypothalamus have been around for a very, very long time.
Yeah,
It's
they're sort of versions of some of the neuronal types within the hypothalamus that exist all the way down to worms.
wow.
The worms don't have a hypothalamus per se,
Hmm.
but the sort of proto types of these neurons were already there in C. elegans in the
Yeah,
worm.
yeah. And so you said in a human, it's roughly the size of a thumbnail. It's located sort of in the center base of the brain. So the cerebral cortex, right? If you just think about it, the wrinkly outer layer part of our brain, it's much, much bigger. And you also said so it's evolutionarily old. There's going to be a lot of conserved ancient functionality here that's common across animals. It's got an interesting architecture at the cellular level. So you said there's more cell types here. There's more cell type diversity here than probably any part of the brain, other than maybe the hindbrain. So if we were to look at, say, the cerebral cortex and sort of count or use molecular techniques to identify distinct types of cells, there's way more diversity in the hypothalamus than other parts of the brain. And based on where it's positioned and based on some other things we're going to talk about, it's connected to a lot of parts of the brain, and it's also sort of a sensor integrator of signals, not just from other neurons, but as we sort of maybe hinted at the beginning, things like hormone signals in the blood as well.
Absolutely. So it acts as a sensor for many hormones within the context of body weight. It's probably safe to say it's a fuel sensor
Mhm.
within the context of body weight. Yeah.
Mhm. And so talk a little bit about this hormone sensing capability and so normally when we talk about the brain, we talk about the blood brain barrier and how it exists and how it's preventing just anything from getting into the brain from the bloodstream. Nonetheless, there are parts of the brain where neurons can sample pretty much directly from the bloodstream, or at least the blood brain barrier is weakened compared to other parts of the brain. Can you talk about that a little bit with respect to the hypothalamus?
So the hypothalamus and the hindbrain actually are both what we call circumventricular organs, and that means that it's not weak. I think it's the designs rather
Mhm.
than a weak in which they are fenestrated. Okay, so in other words, there is the ability of peripheral hormones to make it into the brain. This is not. It doesn't go through by diffusion. I want to point out. All right,
Mhm.
it is a regulated process
Got it.
in which in these parts of the brain, they're able, these hormones and many other things, including nutrients themselves, manage to actually get across this layer and into the hypothalamus and in the hindbrain as well, where the hypothalamus therefore samples and then is able to use the information for command and control.
Mhm. So hormones and nutrients can literally get into the hypothalamus. It's not a passive process. This is supposed to happen, so to speak. It's designed or evolved this way. Um, and we talked about leptin
Evolve,
before.
that's right, not design. Yeah,
Yeah,
evolve in
evolved,
this way. I'm not
designed
a
designed
just to
through
be
a
clear.
distributed,
Yeah,
decentralized natural
yeah,
process.
yeah.
Um, uh, so hormones obviously can get into the hypothalamus.